Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Talking Galleries, for having us. And I think we're very thankful to be able to talk about Africa, I'll say, you know, in New York, and talking about the infrastructure that we have. I'm so excited to have this great panelist to talk and discuss leveling up infrastructure in Africa. We have Ito Barada, that doesn't need any introduction, but I will introduce her anyway. She's an artist living from Morocco. Living in New York. Her practice is in New York. She's recognized for multidisciplinary investigation of cultural phenomenon and historical narrative, engaging with the performativity of archival practice and public intervention. Ito's installation reinterprets social relationship and uncover subaltern histories. You have to excuse our accents. English is not our first language here. Her work is obviously already at the Tate, Modern, MoMA, the Met, Renaissance Society, the Walker Art Center, the Whitechapel Gallery. She has been exhibited in different Biennale in Venice, 2007, 2011. She has taught at Bard College, the Cooper Union, the Vivi School of Photography. She's the founding director of the Cinematheque in Tangier, which is an artist-led initiative. And she taking all her courage again to start a new one called the Mothership in Tangier as well. I will let her a little bit later introduce her new initiative. The picture you're seeing behind us are the initiative of each of the speakers. They will leave after I finish introducing them, but I just wanted you to have an idea of the type of infrastructure we're talking about on the continent. So we have Othman Lazrak next to Ito Barada, who's the director of the Foundation of Alliance and president of the MACAAL Museum in Marrakech. Othman Lazrak is a partner in crime for our fair in 154 Marrakech, but he's also the associate architect of the Lazraq studio firm, director of the Fondation Alliance since 2013, a not-for-profit association with focus on supporting cultural development in Morocco, and of course the president of MACAAL Marrakech since its inauguration in 2016. I know you'll be talking about this, your initiative, so I will let you, talk more about that. He's also a great collector and a supporter of 154 since the beginning. Then next to him, we have Ayana Jackson, who's an artist and a photographer. She has also started a residency program in South Africa called Still, am I pronouncing it right? So Ayana is born in the US. Her practice is between South Africa and Brooklyn. You have a studio in both. And I didn't mention that too about Ito as well. Your practice is here for the moment. So Ayana uses her lenses to deconstruct the history of portraiture. She questioned photography's role in perpetuating stratified identities. Her work has examined myths of the Black diaspora and restaged archival images as the mean to liberate the Black body. Her work is collected by institutions including the Smithsonian Museum, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Newark Museum, the G.P. Chase Morgan Collection, the Princeton University Art Museum, the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne, the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Sorry, there's so many collections. And finally, we have Dodie next to Dodie Karangi, who's next to Ayana, who is the founder, and I know him well through Afriart Gallery, who you founded in 2002. And this is the gallery that we had the chance to have at 154. You started this gallery knowing that you are an artist to start. You founded this gallery with a focus on supporting advancing career of African contemporary artists, as well as facilitating collaboration among artists, professional and institutions globally. The gallery artists have been featured in many international exhibitions and Art Basel lately. I think the last time I saw you, you were at Basel, Miami. You have founded START, which is a journal of art and culture criticism in Kampala. You have funded as well CART, which is a project establishing with the objective to establish a modern art museum in the country, which will facilitate research, exchange programs, and training, as well as offering a state-of-the-art exhibition space for local work. CART also produced the first Kampala Biennale in 2014. we're all here to talk about, your wonderful initiatives and, but I wanted to talk a bit more about the market. And we definitely have a moment where the world is paying attention to the continent, to African artists. And we've seen in the past 10 years, I think with the fair, I can say, an appreciation of artists from the continent and the diaspora like we never known before. The market is fast growing. It's still very underserved. We have dedicated art fair like 154 for contemporary African art, but there's a few in South Africa. We have two in South Africa. We have Joburg Art Fair, which is not a dedicated African art fair, but more an international sorry, it's Cape Town Art Fair, who's more international, but basically there's two in South Africa, one in Nigeria, and we have, I think, a specialized art fair in Paris as well, and now we have more and more of those galleries being included in mainstream art fairs, which has not been the case, at least until I started the fair in 2013. We have seen also growing numbers of galleries starting, their spaces on the continent, but also opening up new spaces in Europe, which is a new phenomenon, we have them, now being strong enough to have visibility outside the continent. So we know the African market continues to flourish. We know we have, a moment of appreciation and a strong visibility. But basically the question, and what we all are trying to ask ourselves today is, what are we doing, for the legacy to support those artists' careers during this important and crucial growth on the continent? So what I know, and maybe it's not clear, but like we have the chance to have 3 artists here on the panel who have started artist-led initiative on the continent, but we have close to 110 listed that I know of artist-led initiative on the continent. And I'm saying that because all those initiatives are usually privately funded by the artists themselves. They have, started as a model towards the community, trying to give back, to have some kind of a platform for artist exchange. I feel the artists, they all have this responsibility to basically have some kind of role in education, in transmission. I think, I think even me traveling between the 3 continents, I've never seen, an artist-led initiative in the West or in the US that has such a weight of responsibility towards, a country, a village, a city, on the continent. So they usually focus on smaller, usually cities, not always those initiatives are part of the major or the main city of the country. And I think it's very interesting to see how all those artists, are trying to respond to some kind of lack of infrastructure on the continent. It all came as a desire, to give back to the community and to create something or, a platform that will help, the future generation or start to educate. And to be honest, for a lot of those artists, they have also been part of their art practice now. I had the chance to talk to several artists, during the preparation of this discussion, and a lot of them said to me that now they see it as an extension of their practice, which is quite interesting, in terms of, the challenges that they meet every day in building those platforms, but also, how it influences their work. So we have the chance to have those wonderful panelists, and I wanted to start with maybe Ito, because you have quite an interesting journey in those initiatives. You started one almost 20 years ago, 15 years ago, the Cinematheque of Tangier, and you basically coming back, with a new initiative, the Mothership. And what I wanted to make sure is that you tell us about, what you have, lived as a journey at the time when you started 15 years ago, and I guess what are your challenges now with this new initiative that you're trying to put in place?
Thanks. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Touria, for inviting me. So it is 20 years later, you're right, because it's opened 15 years, but I didn't count the 5 years before the opening of the Cinematheque in Tangier. The Cinematheque is an art house cinema. It's an archive, and it's also a local community-led center. It's a school for film and cinema. There's a cafe, so it's also a destination in the city with the genius idea was the free Wi-Fi 15 years ago, so everybody would just go there to work and write and do their homework after school. When we started, there was this idea, you said the weight of responsibility. The idea was not even to create a platform. The idea was that in 1991, I don't know if you remember, the same years that the border closed. So the European borders opened internally and they closed towards us. And I'm from Tangier, which is 15 kilometers across from Europe that you can see on a sunny day. And overnight, the European borders closed. For most of us who have family on both sides, it was like a Berlin Wall. The other coincidence was that the satellite dishes started to work. We grew up with only one Spanish channel, Moroccan television that you could hardly watch, except for cartoons in classical, Japanese cartoons in classical Arabic, and we had Gibraltar. But then all of a sudden, the whole world poured the same year that the borders were closed. And our idea, as me and my partners, artist Bushra Khalili, it was part of that group, was to, since most people could not get out anymore, we were going to bring, since Muhammad couldn't go to the mountain, we were bringing the mountain to Muhammad. So the idea was, what can we do that's so interesting that everybody will want to come towards us and not the other way around? And that's how an old abandoned cinema turned into a cultural project.
Okay, but how was it funded?
It was a nightmare.
Okay.
And it still is, and I haven't learned anything in 20 years because I'm starting again. It was founded privately, publicly, it's a mixture. And I remember Kaylin Wilson-Goldie giving a talk about 15 years ago saying how complicated it is to get funding. If you had funding from foreign, you know, from the Ford Foundation, that's who gave us our first grant. Mokhtar El-Koukash from Ford gave us the startup grant that started a lot of. We had money from Prince Claus Fund. We had money from the European community with all the difficulties attached. We had, and we still have money from Majorel Gardens Foundation, which is our principal donor. We had loans that took forever to pay. We had private donors that gave us gift. But to get back to Kaylin, she would say that if you had money from abroad, you were suspicious, and if you had local money, you couldn't be independent. So that's basically, we never had money from the city as a permanent, our budget is about $150,000 a year still. We don't own the building, we rent it. Our programs, because we do local programs, but we also have programs in other cities, is about $60K extra. And we just don't have local support after so many years. I think I'll talk later about the misunderstanding. I think entertainment is what is needed, and we don't fit in any of the cultural, we're social, but it's the hybrid identity that's a complicated thing.
So you're coming back with the Mothership?
Yeah.
Which is, can you tell us a bit
more? The Mothership is, I have a family farm in Tangier, which is basically a very small house, but a very large garden, 8.5 acres, and we are transforming it into an artist residence and a research center around eco-feminist principles. There's a dye garden, there's going to be herbal gardens, there's a lot of agriculture, but in a small scale. A place for retreat and a place to come and do nothing, basically. Rest and learn from the people before you, the people that will be coming to meet us and give classes. Okay. And we just have our first residents. Nourdina Zarraf from Marrakech is the first wonderful
So will it be more turn inside, so like to welcome artists from?
No, I'm mostly fundraising to be able to give grants to everybody who comes, so that they can come and not have any pressure, financial pressure, small stipends, and bigger for Moroccan artists, which will be my priority.
Okay, great. So maybe I'll jump to Ayana because she's a completely different profile here, and she is an American artist who obviously moved some of her practice sometimes, partly of the year, to Johannesburg, and you decided to open a residency in Johannesburg. I want to talk about your journey and why you thought it was necessary, and what are your challenges, because it's really new. So you are starting, with the challenges of today, which I would love to hear about more.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so I moved my practice to South Africa in 2007, and it was there that I actually came into myself as an artist. I'm from the United States, born and raised. However, by the time I got to South Africa, I didn't have the pedigree, I didn't have the schooling, I didn't study art, I came out of sociology. So in New York, not that I was looking for it, so I wouldn't want to say that New York wasn't open to me, but I didn't have the access that some of my counterparts and had. And it just so happened that I moved to South Africa for completely different reasons, due to photography, but not necessarily fine art. But while I was there, I fell in love with the South African photography community. They fell in love with me, and I achieved my first gallery representation, and essentially was put on the scene. Bamako Biennale, Paris Photos. So many of my first opportunities came through my association with South Africa and the South African art scene. So I fast forward, I have a career that I can say is relatively sustainable, and I'm enjoying a certain amount of success, financial and otherwise. And I find that South Africa has a lot to do with that. And so as I began thinking about moving from my current studio to another place in South Africa, I decided to convert my current studio into an artist residency program. Still, just quickly, the name is in homage to my great-grandparents, and it's a longer story that's not worth telling at this moment, but it's the most important part that's associated with the name is that in my family, we have a large tradition of movement from freedom, from bondage to freedom as a Black American and the narrative of the slave trade. But also, I come from a family of teachers. I come from a family that has constantly given back and reached back at every step of success. So for me, creating still was a way to create opportunities for South and Southern African artists primarily, not necessarily exclusively, for primary caregivers, not necessarily just women. And to basically fulfill a need. The residency it offers a live workspace. It offers a stipend, currently paid for by me. But we're launching. We haven't officially launched. We'll launch in fall. But I've had 3 artists so far, and they're offered a live workspace. They're offered an honorarium. They're offered a stipend. And essentially the idea is exactly that, to give artists a chance to really detach from the world, focus on their craft. I know that it changed my life the first time I did a residency at the Cité des Arts in Paris. I began working with my own body, for instance, because I had the freedom and the space for the first time to just kind of dream. And the work that I made during my first artist residency is the foundation for the success that I have right now. So that is a crucial offering, particularly for young artists. And in the case that I'm speaking of, dealing with South Africa, you have artists that are in the 30 miles or 10 miles from the central Johannesburg and have zero access to what's happening, even though South Africa and Johannesburg, particularly with photography, is kind of the epicenter of what's happening, and people that are only 10 miles, for instance, the artist in residence now, she's from Soweto. It's not that far from the Chelsea of Johannesburg, but learning through her, I learned how difficult it was for her to even get access to the networking possibilities and the like. So essentially, Still was created to, out of my own need, or to replicate the solving of my own need, and to give back to a space that gave me so much.
But what is very exciting is like a lot of, you're mentioning, and you're obviously grateful to South Africa giving you your first opportunities in a way. And what we learn is like everybody that is working, think about, being in the West, having more opportunities than, you know, being on the African continent. So I find it very interesting that for you it was a completely opposite in a way, you know, in terms of the beginning of your career. And thank you for giving back. This is great for the continent. And I wanted to go to Dodie, because Dodie, you're an artist. You've been an artist. You started as an artist. You had to start this gallery as almost a necessity for you, for probably the artists around you, as a support system for the promotion of the artists in East Africa. You also created different platforms that you know, you thought were necessary, like the cart with the Biennale of Kampala. You have a project of a future museum and a future space. And what I want to understand is your journey, you know, how when you decided to put your career aside and to start, you know, maybe not even by will, but you had to continue all the great initiative you started in Kampala.
Thank you for, in our culture, we like to thank a lot first. But, so thank you for inviting me to this platform. I am one of those people that do follow a certain journey that just appears to me. It's like a guiding star that I follow. I started the gallery, Afriart Gallery, in 2002, right after I just finished art school, for a simple reason that I was one Monday drawing class where everybody would attend. I saw about 120 of us in the class and realized that what are we going to do when we get out of here? Because it never occurred to me. What do artists do when they finish art school? So I left that class, I remember.
They're trouble.
I wasn't one of the most serious art students, but I left that art class and I went to to look for this, to answer this question. And the things that artists make art and they put it in galleries, and you know, and then, so there were two galleries in the country at the time. One was a national gallery, another was a privately owned gallery by a German dealer. The German dealer gallery was good, but it was representing the top artists of the time. The Ugandan, well, the national gallery was there, but you know, those of you who know about public institutions on the continent of Africa, you might understand that sometimes they're not the best run. So I didn't want my work to be in there. And then the next question was, what does it take to open a gallery so that I can show my work and my colleagues? So I started, you know, looking at, I needed walls. I needed a room with walls. And the next thing I needed was a guest list to invite the richest people in the country to come and buy the art. And I was fortunate that I had this grandfather who had a building which would flood because of the water. It would flood once in 2 years, but you never know when it would do that, so he never used it. So I used that building, and I asked him for, once we had a party at home, and he had everybody, the diplomats and the business people attended, so I said, I need that guest list. Is that all you need? They say, yeah. So anyway, I started the gallery for that simple reason, to show the artists. It took me 3 years before I started showing my own work, because to start a gallery, I realized actually it requires some work, and I did it. And so 3 years later, things were a bit stable. I started doing a show every year, once a year, yeah, for a month. Again, this might seem whatever, but you would imagine that an artist would start a gallery in my country to show their work, but I couldn't between all of that. So it was once a month, every November, beautiful show, always sold out. And when I say sold out, I'm talking about sold out in the country for, you know, pieces of around $200 to $500. That was a lot of money. So we did very well.
It's not the case anymore.
No, we did very well. So I did my shows for 10 years until another thing occurred to me, which was there's a world outside the Ugandan world of art. So I started traveling, and I would see, you know, things, galleries, other artists. But the most remarkable event that happened to me that was in 2015 when I went to the Venice Biennale curated by the late Okwi. And I remember walking through and seeing all these African artists that were in his show, and there were no Ugandan artists in that entire show. And Uganda has this MACAAL art school, which was the most, I don't know, biggest facilitator for contemporary, for artists on the continent for a very long time. And none of these people, you know, none of the Ugandans were there. So it caused another question of visibility. How does an African artist on the continent reach that highest point in the art world? And so the gallery started participating in art fairs. And we went to, I think the first one was Joburg Art Fair, and so on and so on. Today, the last year we were at Art Basel in Miami. So that's sort of about the gallery journey. But along that journey, there were other factors about visibility. We wanted to show, because we looked at how does an artist, you know, you can make art, make money, and that's great. But how do generations revere you? How do you be part of the future? You go into things like museums and places like museums. Of course, by this story, you know that there's none in Kampala, or Uganda for that matter. So we wanted to build a contemporary art museum, just like his. Again, we didn't understand that it actually takes some work. So we went into another, so as we pondered that, you know, we realized that, okay, maybe we start, before we get the money and the infrastructure and everything, let's start a journal that documents what we are doing today. And that was 2007. So we started this journal to document so that in the event that there's a museum, we can go back to these stories and say, hey, do we have any works from that? You know, we can you know, yeah, you know. So we, so again, I'm talking about me, and then there's other people.
Other people behind you, but where are you now?
But they're artists, and, you know, so I'm like a lone guy, yeah, those ones. So, but at the same time, so the other thing that started along the thing was the Kampala Biennale, going back to the story of Moses going to the mountain and vice versa. There's no way we were going to be accepted into the art world because we were, I don't know, non-existent. So we needed to create a situation where the city is known, and therefore people come to us. So we created the Kampala Biennale. Kampala Biennale started as a normal biennale, like Venice, where you go to see the top artists, and therefore people collect them later. We didn't have the audience, so we have many missing infrastructure. We didn't have the audience in Kampala, no collectors, no, you know, no press or whatever. So that would not be the method for us to exist. That wouldn't work for us because, so the Biennale became a platform to change these, to balance the infrastructure. So the next editions were about artist training, mentorship. So we created a platform of transmission where master artists find apprentice artists, they work together and they present a biennale. We did that for the last two biennales, and for the next two biennales we are going to deal with another gap, which is curating. So it's going to be master curators working with apprentice curators so that those apprentice curators could connect with top galleries and they could curate shows that would then be shown in Kampala. Another important part to talk about that whole thing is the fact that, like we say, things staying at home. There's a need for us, it's important for us that we do all of these things at home in Kampala. We reach the highest points in art world, but from Kampala. one of our biggest artists that we represent, we worked with them in Kampala, and we've reached the heights of it. But with that, so they didn't first go to some gallery in New York, and then they became big. So we operate around.
The journey started in Kampala, and they're still in Kampala.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, I mean, you started exactly the same journey as I started it, thinking that, you needed international visibility for those artists to exist and to be recognized and to be part of a different museum. And it's funny because yesterday I was lucky enough to be invited to the Katona Museum in Bedford. I don't know if you know where it is, but it was so exciting to hear them, how much money they raised. They were at 6.5 million, and for a tiny little town, having the Haas brothers, being awarded and things like that. And I was like, oh my God, like in such a different world. And it just, I thought it was just amazing if we could have like a little of that budget, going to the continent. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, we're coming to Othman, and your journey is very different. You're a collector, and you have started the Museum of MACAAL. So yes. Can you tell us a bit more about you?
Thank you, Touria. Thank you, everyone. I started very young. I mean, I'm still very young, but I started very young. I came back from my studies abroad, and in Morocco, in a country where, super creative. I mean, I'm from a family of collectors. My parents themselves are collectors for as long as I can remember. And when you grew up surrounded by art, and you like hone your eyes, and you travel for art, and when you're with your parents, and you go to museums, and when you come home, of course, there's this huge gap. I mean, there's a lack of infrastructures in Morocco. It's obvious, but still, when I started running the foundation that my parents started 15 years ago, I realized that it was already an existing ecosystem that was like already in place. Auction houses, fairs, galleries, residences, etc., etc. You were part of them, and it was already a very, burgeoning ecosystem. So I came to this at this point in time where I was either, okay, you're running a foundation now. The foundation was dedicated to social and sustainable developments, also donation to healthcare, but it was doing it was at the beginning, the foundation started to kind of structure the collection that was already existing. But I decided to dedicate it 100% to the cultural development of the country by, of course, developing, launching impactful initiatives such as MACAAL, but also a photo contest for young emerging African artists in Africa. Photographers, but also a monumental sculpture park, but also different educational and mediation programmation. So we have been so far involved in different levels. As a foundation, of course, we have a very dynamic and young team. I'm not from a cultural background. I'm just a collector. I'm just passionate, and I'm just I love I love being surrounded with artists and art, and trying to kind of being able to do what I do today is very. I'm very grateful for that. When I started MACAAL, it was the first private contemporary museum in the country. So having, you fill in a gap, and we felt it, but it was also very challenging because, you had to remove this whole, misconception of what a museum could be, it is, and how you can break the codes of traditional museums that you will see in the West. In Morocco, in the context of Morocco, within the whole, traditional backgrounds of existing initiative, I had to create new tools to build an audience, attract the audience, have a public that would be, coming back. So I had the chance to work with incredible people on the ground. and a team that represents me, dynamic and the living museum. Where the goal for what we put in place. So as Touria said earlier, English is definitely not my first language, so bear with me. But as Ayana said something, I did this as well for my own need in a way. You know, I think MACAAL is a philanthropic initiative with zero commercial interests. I mean, it's a museum, and we definitely have, of course, different goals, different goals, but we have a responsibility today, and we need to fulfill it. So all the challenges that we're going to speak today, I think we all have the same in a way. You know, you want to be sustainable, you want to engage with the community, and you want to have straightened and straighten the actual ecosystem. So this is who we are now. You know, I would like to call MACAAL a home because it houses today the collection, but it also is a residence, workshop platform. We organize conferences. We're in the city that is very touristy, Marrakech. For those who know Marrakech, being in lockdown for 2 years, you know, you had to reinvent yourself. And I mean, we were like at this point to close it and to like, okay, let's move online. But we continued, and we created new tools thanks to technology and the social networks. There was a point that was very interesting earlier in the public institution panel where social networks, where they said that social network was very important. And I agree, because without that, we wouldn't be visible. We know that was the only display, that was the only way to connect to the public that we lost. Mm. So yeah, so this is the challenges so far.
So in the previous panel, actually, on the institution, what was very interesting when, you know, we asked the panelists if they had a source of inspiration outside the US, they actually did not look outside, they looked inside. And I was wondering if you know, when you started this initiative, and he has a full-time job, by the way, he's an architect, and he has a, but did you look at models that you were interested into?
I mean, as I said earlier, it's very hard to adapt an existing model to Morocco, because it's you know, it's a different public, it's a different audience. So no, I mean, of course, I would you know, we all have inspirations. But the fact that that is a privately funded museum, I think it also gave me the possibility to do things on my own, you know, and in my way, and explore different ways of, you know, testing. I'm going to try to exhibit this way, and I'm going to try to, you know, so even in the photos that you've seen earlier, some of them are you know, scenographed by in-house, you know, curated and scenographed in-house. So yeah.
To that, actually, I just wanted to just quickly say, I also noticed that, and I realized what for me, as an outsider, right, living in Africa and working in Africa, it's, you know, at this point, you know, a good portion of my lifetime, just that fact of shifting perspectives, shifting landscapes, I've found that it's helped me to be a bit more sensitive to the differences of not just challenges, but also of approaches, right? And, you know, in thinking about social media, for instance, yes, we have an issue with, like, so professionalizing is part of one of the initiatives for the project, but one of the reasons is, for instance, you know, a lot of the artists that I'm in contact with in South Africa are selling, especially at the pandemic, but prior to the pandemic, were via Instagram, Facebook, social media. And I think it's a privilege to be able to say that one has to be able to see the work in order to purchase the work, but at the same time, you know, and so it's like a lot of kind of credit has to be done to how artists in a different landscape are approaching these challenges, because it's just not possible for everyone to see the work. You know, obviously initiatives like 154 have created an incredible amount of visibility and capacity to see work in situ. You've done Marrakech, you do New York, you do London, and you're expanding, and so, you know, a lot of artists are people are able to have that tactile, but still there's so many artists that are having to function just with social media. Again, transportation, again.
Of course, and I mean, we've seen it around those 2 years
of apartheid, like, you know what I mean? Like the whole, there's so many challenges that we're not aware of, right? And so to look at the innovation that's happening from within allows you to think about what's happening here differently. So I think it was right to kind of acknowledge that.
But Ito and Ayana, you both have this, you know, double, in a way, view of like being with your practice outside, you know, Africa, and then coming back to Africa and like trying to develop something for Morocco or for South Africa. Like, do you think it gives you this probably a glance that is different, because you know about maybe what's really needed for artists locally that you see in your, you know, with maybe not having the same necessity when you're in New York, for example. So you come back and you have this maybe more clear view of what, you know, could be needed for artists to have this this development, you know, brought to them, you know, that you probably do not see when you're, you know, you see it in the US, you come back in Morocco, there's plenty of missing, you know, parts. And do you think it puts you in a situation where you have a better view of what's needed, you know, for the local community?
Yeah, I'm lucky to have a double passport, so I'm allowed to cross borders. I was born in Paris, so I have a French passport when my parents were students. I think what I'd like to talk about is about the different paradoxes that we're stuck in. And one of them is that we want museums and institutions to be different from the ones we've seen. If we've been lucky to travel, we saw some of the failures, we saw some of the things that are not adapted. We saw also the way museums and galleries are shifting today, and that crisis is something that we are up against in our homes because financiers want us to do the same model, where we have to modelize what we're thinking vis-a-vis Europe, America. And what we are trying to invent is a different model, in my case, an artist-led model, which means not incompetent, but not with the same competence. And I think trusting artists is at the core of, if we want to go faster and revolutionize the artistic scenes and the cultural offerings in our countries, trusting the artists and what they say, what they need, would be so helpful. But the founders want, you know, they want us to grow. They want to know what's the target audience. How can you segmentize it? I mean, the vocabulary is absolutely crazy, but it's also a bullet, not a bullet, comment on dit un boulet?
Weight.
Chain,
yeah.
Merci. A chain that stops us from organically adjusting, inventing, adapting to the different communities we're serving locally and shifting, because we need to change all the time. We show, for example, African cinema and European cinema, and we're one of the last places where you can see world cinema, but we have also documentary and artist film, but there's no cinema in the area that does that kind of programming. And even if there's 10 people in the screening rooms where it's a 300-seat cinema, it's 5 + 5 + 5. And today, if we do, I don't know, a Fassbinder retrospect, the kids who were there 10 years ago are going to complain that I have one film that I didn't bring that I brought last time. And I'm like, yes, we did it. So that's one paradox. The other paradox is the romanticizing of the artist-led organization. We need to do our work. And so it's fantastic that we took the responsibility to push and lead and organize, and great. But when do we have time? I hid in my office when I was doing my work for 10 years. I had a back studio to be able to do my work, and every time I felt guilty because I wasn't doing the real work, which was running the organization, until a friend, you know, reconciled the other by kindly saying that the cinema was also, you know, part of my practice. And thank you, Stuart Comer, former Tate MoMA, for saying that, because it was, but artists should be doing their work. And so if we can trust us, and if you can help us to get out, once we start, or if you can just have us on boards, you know, pay us when we give a talk. I'm serious. This is normal here. It's not normal in you know, Wage. Look at how Wage does their work. I'm a Wage supporter, and you don't invite us when we take time off from family and work. We need to be also paid. And I think listening to artists, supporting them to do what with their community and the partners, that small time of visionary energy, and then let us get back to work.
Yeah.
And well, it's an interesting point on funding and paying, you know, the artists when they do talk, etc. Because at the end of the day, yes, artists need to do the work, but like in those infrastructure, you know, you have a job, you have kids, you have, you know, to probably pay a mortgage. Maybe not you, but
I
like
wasn't paid for the Cinematheque for
that's
10
what I'm
years.
saying. That's what I'm saying.
The law didn't allow a nonprofit. If I was leading it, I could not be paid.
Yes.
And we can talk also about taxes.
Yes.
We need to change that in the tax support to the local infrastructures that are not for profit.
Baby steps.
No, but that's when we need big institutions for that.
Well, you know, they have their own challenges, you know, like, and they are being very independent in a way by being, you know, fully self-funded, you know.
I mean, it's
and still, can I say something else? Yeah. Still receiving a lot of submission from artists, from different initiatives to still be
younger initiatives for sure. And what we were talking about something very important about all these lists of funders for the Cinematheque, the Prince Claus, I don't know which embassy, etc. So Majorelle. So all these international.
So all those former colonial, basically, powers in Africa still are the one providing all the grants, all the.
Many of the Africans' initiatives are in need of them, you know, and they can't survive without all these funds. That's what I'm saying.
And we're competing with friends for them locally and their former colonial.
Exactly. Not only that, and the grants are difficult to get, and it's a lot of thesis to write and report to. So you need like a full structure to have a structure.
I mean, I agree. I think definitely. As I said earlier, I don't think I knew what I was getting into when I got into it, but I'm here now. I didn't. Yeah. But I think what's interesting is though, I think you know, when you recognize the need, you know, and well, first of all, as artists, as creatives, a lot of us, you know, whether we know what the destination is, we commit to the journey. And if the project morphs, if it becomes bigger, or if it only exists for the period of time that it can be allowed to exist, the point is that it exists. Because I think, you know, artists, I think, like, again, in this situation, many of us can recognize just a basic need. And when you think about the exponential kind of impact of just doing anything in some of the landscapes that we're doing things in, and I'm not just talking about in Africa, but you know, it already kind of does its work. I do think, however, that it's this. I think that at some, you know, I think that there needs to be a way for organizations to help the sustainability of artist-run projects. There are different funding models that I'm exploring that we may talk about. But the thing is, you know, it is true, at the end of the day, many of us need to get back to our work. Many of us need to get back to our studio. Some of us don't even have, myself being one of them, don't have the kind of operations management skills to actually really pull it off at the sustainable level that we would like without the ability to hire staff.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, like I think that, you know, I think that there's something that needs to happen in terms of some of us being out of our depth and those people who can offer that life, you know, life vest of helping, you know, from a business management standpoint. You know, there are just different kinds of ways, funding and otherwise, to help to support some of these projects. And I think it's some serious attention should be given because it is a good part of the ecosystem. Because without supporting, particularly initiatives that are outside, from my opinion, initiatives that are outside of the United States and Europe, you know, you're locking out a good portion of the world from its ability to participate, and for the democratization of the art, of the market, of the ecosystem that is the art world. So unless something is done to help to, you know, to make these projects sustainable, then we're in this kind of self-reflective preaching to the choir.
So you're leading me to a bit of Malai's questions here in terms of like, if basically we could ideally ask the government, the artistic collectors, the institution to do more for the continent, what should we ask for? You know, what would be the ideal model? What do we need now? So taxes for sure, and
no, I mean tax policy that supports these organizations. I think something we can work on is, I mean, us collectively, but maybe 154, maybe it's a MACAAL project with you guys too, is to work on guidelines and guidebooks, like information. People who start nonprofit in spaces, there are so many. I mean, Le 18, MACAAL, Think Tangier, they do an incredible work. I mean, Le 18 is going to Documenta this year. And if we can support these organizations with information, and the ones that are starting. Like, my biggest pride at the Cinematheque is all the babies we have. Legitimate and illegitimate children we have all over the country. And so if we could work on supporting, like maybe a website, like the Foundation for the Arts here, something that where people could find resources quickly, information about taxes, how do you sign up, where is the fundraising this year?
Sorry.
That's all.
No, that's one of the reasons why I think it's very important to start sharing knowledge through initiatives such as the boot camp that we did, which we were a mentor. The boot camp was 4 intensive days that we did in Marrakech with the 19 students, mentees, but they were
professionals
from every countries, most of every countries in Africa, and we worked with mentors to, you know, kind of help them, guide them, and structure their business. In a way, so it helped a lot, and we're continuing it through talks.
Which is a bit the role of the Biennale with this pairing, right?
Yeah, I think there's also you're talking about what needs to be done. I think there's policy things, there's infrastructure issues, and there's money. So, as a gallerist, I don't have any issues with that part of my work, apart from, of course, you know, taxation and that kind of thing. But these initiatives that we do, I think I've been successful at what I do because I'm an artist, so I understand exactly what an artist needs, so therefore I can do it. But there's a need for, in terms of funding or facilitating the artist-led projects. I think that the biggest the person that should come in is the collector, because the collector is the eventual benefactor, whether they make money out of the work later, or whether they build a museum or whatever and show off their collection, whether they do it for prestige or whatever. But I think collectors are the money element of the art. They're the ones that spend it. So there's a way, and I think like what you've done with the museum is that it's like a giving back. So there's a need for those individuals to put money through that to support the continuation of this artist-led.
But then you have to.
But you have to educate the collector,
yes,
basically,
so
which is
the
also.
The work to be done is to educate, is to. I mean, everybody needs to be educated. I mean,
no, I know, educate, take it by the hand,
curators.
Understand the importance of the ecosystem, you know, locally and internationally, and how it is important to support an artist or you know, Le 18 going to Documenta, and how they should support an initiative like this. And I think the most difficult part for all of us, I think, on the continent is that this education and maybe where the finance are for all those projects or through the collectors, and there's plenty of new billionaires in Africa, you know, that could support this ecosystem. So it's not a question of funding really, but it's a question of
Can
them.
I have a list?
Yes, I'll give it to you later.
Well, me too, while you're at it.
No, but it is
doing
about taking them by the hand, changing this mind switch about, you know, not just buying art, and like sometimes they want to buy art at the best, you know, price, and like they still negotiate, and it is about changing those minds. And I had like the chance to interview Smooth, you know, from MoMA about this particular panel, and he had quite an interesting idea of a solution that I would like to share with you, because it might be interesting. It's like, what about building a cultural fund for Africa that is at a, you know, I guess Pan-African level and not, you know, at a country level. And there's obviously people who have money, people who don't, different foundations could give money to this cultural fund, and all those artist-led initiatives, you know, could submit to this particular fund.
Would you lead it?
Well, I wouldn't mind if I have the time with 154, but in the idea is like, instead of submitting to always those international grants, is to have an African cultural fund that could be linked to the African Bank of Development, for example, and that could have, you know, a strategy to support, you know, thinking of, you know, what kind of impact each initiative has.
There's a great model. There's AFAC, the Arab Fund for Culture, and that was in
doing a great
Oman.
job.
They're in Beirut. It's fantastic. It's led by a woman. And the Ford Foundation, for example, now doesn't give money directly to grants. Here, I mean, there, they give to AFAC, and AFAC distributes in the Arab world.
And they have a better understanding, probably, locally.
That's a very good idea.
But
Doesn't it exist already?
No.
No, I don't.
That's amazing.
There's also funds, you know, from artist-led point of view that, you know, they've tried to, there's one that Abdoulaye Konate did in Benin, but for the West African, and the support individual artists, but it's in a very limited and small scale, you know. What we're talking about is, for example, all those looted pieces of work, you know, that are being, you know, identified. Exactly, goes to the fund, exactly. And then you have, so I think, you know, on this positive note, because I mean, what I want to say is that we have a lot of new museum, new galleries, you know, in the pipeline as well. So let's finish on all those extraordinary things that are happening on the continent. We had the chance to have an amazing 10 year of appreciation and visibility that is growing and growing. So I want to finish on a positive note and actually open it to the audience, if it's possible, if you have any questions. Because I think we're getting to that time. I had a sign.
May I ask that you introduce yourself, please, before you speak?
If there's questions.
So,
there's one.
Would you have a question, just so we know who's speaking? Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Marek from Artifacts. We collect exhibition data, so do you hear me? Yes. No? You don't hear me? Yes.
No, we hear
So I'm Marek from Artifacts. We collect exhibition data. This is what we do. But I'm particularly interested because Daudi said that he set up his own infrastructure, like there was no gallery, so he built a gallery. There was no audience, so he built a biennial. And I was yesterday at the Whitney opening, and I have seen all these young people and middle class of New York, older and young people and families, going to the Whitney Biennale and looking at the artworks. And I wanted to know about Africa. Is there a kind of evolution of appreciation of art from the normal middle class? For example, like Arco in Madrid, where the whole city goes, like the king opens the fair. It's a fair with the most attendance in the world. Is there something to create, or is there something in Africa, this appreciation? Because you always, as a Westerner, you always think about lacks of things, lacks of funding, lacks of knowledge. There's always lacking something. But is there an appreciation This
So
is my
definitely,
question.
and I think Othman is probably the best person
No, I think
to talk about it.
I mean, sorry, the city where MACAAL is Marrakech. So Marrakech is also well known to be, international and touristy. So it attracts a lot of people, and it's also very geographically ideally located. You were basically at 2 hours away from Europe. So being in Marrakech, we've seen incredible initiatives such as the Biennale of Marrakech that last for like 12 years. But, all the initiatives you just talked about, the 18, etc. All these initiatives are here because there is a demand. There is a public for it. We've struggled at the beginning, obviously, like any new initiatives, like you're shy to put foot in a public space in a way. So we've had to kind of break these mentalities. I like to always compare, I'm an architect myself, so I like to compare the architecture to, there's a saying in French, we say, tell me where you live and I tell you who you are, because where you live is the reflection of who you are. So basically the Moroccan traditional architecture is the riad. You know what's a riad? It's a small house that is completely blind on the outside, but once you're in, it's completely open. It's like heaven. So this is how Moroccans are. So once you open that door, and once you get into know them and fidéliser,
Yes, and you did a lot of programs to engage.
You attract them, and they get interested. So we did this initiative that was very funny because we had Glenn Laurie from MoMAC that came to MACAAL all the way to Marrakech, and he told us, I need to do this at MoMA. We organize a couscous. Couscous is a traditional dish in Morocco, for those who don't know.
Friday.
We organize a couscous every Friday with 40 to 50 people. So it's completely open to the public, to whoever wants to come without a tag on them. Like you're either a collector, association, the woman from the Medina, the gardeners, the kids, the neighbors. And we invite everyone, and it became a rendezvous, So we have the gardeners that will bring their kids. Then we have the taxi drivers that will come with their kids. With them, a big collector or a big artist. And we're happy because we create a community that is today, when they meet again, they know that they met at MACAAL. So MACAAL has become a kind of a reference for them. So yes, there is definitely a public. We just have to be more attractive and seduce them the best way we could.
And to add on this, I just had the chance to go to Benin. They had this big event for the repatriation of I think there was 29 objects that was returned from France to Benin. And there was years of debate about should they be returned, not returned, and to be fair, they did something amazing because they have 3 museum being built in the pipeline, but none could welcome those 29 objects. So basically what the president did of Benin is that he opened the presidential palace and made it as a museum for the return of this work. And they made that exhibition free for 3 months.
We should do that
for everyone. And basically, it's been full every hour of the day from people coming from all over the world, Benin, from the different parts, traveling hours to just see those 29, objects that were returned from France to Benin. So I think, if they have access, they will have an audience. So it's...
in Morocco, we have our king in Morocco is also very supportive to cultural initiatives. So he was the first one to open an art museum in the country.
a contemporary
art, modern contemporary art museum in the country. So the king is also very supportive, and he opens the doors, the ways to every possibilities. So it's now the turn to the next generations, us, to kind of take the lead and propose, initiate. And that's it. So I think the future is in our hands. It's not in the country, because I've been now in Morocco for 18 years. I know what it is. It's not going to happen.
But then you also have, you have gallery systems. I mean, I know that's private, but you know, you have, there are gallery systems all over Accra, Ghana. There are gallery systems all over Lagos. There are gallery systems all over Johannesburg. You have the Congo Biennale. You have the Kampala Biennale. You have the Bamako Biennale in Mali. You had the Angola Triennale. You had the Johannesburg Biennale that Okui did in the 90s. I mean, I think that the question is not whether there is interest. The question is there visibility for the amount of interest there actually is?
Yep.
And circulation inside Africa also is a question.
Yes, this is definitely something we didn't talk about, but like more collaboration within the countries on the continent, more probably exchange between exhibition. I mean, I'm very excited because there's one artist in Africa that is based in Paris, Joël Adriano, who did the Pavilion of Madagascar, who decided that his 2023 year was about, you know, all the exhibition on the continent. So he's exhibiting in three continents, in three museums at the same time on the continent. And I think one thing that is interesting as well is that you have been approached by a lot of international galleries and museum of artists.
You have artists, African artists now abroad that wants to, you know, be represented or exhibited in Africa. So you had many, I mean, various galleries, international galleries that would, you know, contact them to see if we can collaborate somehow. So yeah, I mean.
And the Zeitz?
So the Zeitz, the Cotonou, the Ouida Museum in Cotonou, and MACAAL in the same time. The three museums are hosting Joël's solo show for the.
And you collaborated to do it at the same time.
And we collaborated, the three of us, to collaborate at the same time.
So it's happening.
It's very much happening.
So it's collaborative.
And I think with Sandra.
Quelqu'un d'autre? No?
Does the black art movement, like the black art renaissance, Black Lives Matter, or this, what is happening here in the US, does this affect African exhibitions, rise of African art and appreciation?
Yes. So basically he's asking if the Black Lives Matter movement here and what happened with George Floyd affected, you know, so it is a bit different because we're talking about Africa. Also, it's interesting to say that Africa is not just all Black Africa. You have North Africa and we're not impacted by the same history probably, but we were in a way. Everybody took part. I know that in London we had, you know, a lot of institution pledging. We had also to, even though this is exactly the core business of what we do every day, but also to pledge that we'll be more aware of different situations. But it's definitely, we've been working at it for the past 10 years, and before us there was probably a lot of curators, and I'm sure of that worked, you know, to give more visibility of artists from the African continent. So I think the Black Lives Matter movement made people much more aware, but I don't think...
Yeah, I remember, because it was 2020, and...
well,
no,
George Floyd was...
George Floyd,
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
that's the thing.
Like Trayvon was like 2014.
Yeah, and that's when, because of the COVID, the lockdown, there was, via social media, a lot of attention, and, you know, Black artists, or African art or Black artists were in at the moment, and not so much in a sense of the movement, but more about visibility. Yeah, but yeah, I think
there was response in Nigeria. Well, there was a kind of back and forth because there was also issues of brutality, police brutality, state-sanctioned brutality in Nigeria, and the artist communities from around the world, diaspora communities, responded to what was going on in Nigeria. There is a conversation, there is a back and forth. So yeah, but I mean, art and politics kind of tend to overlap, and so yeah, you definitely, where Black bodies are concerned. And it is important to note that it's not only Black bodies when you're talking about Africa, but since the question is directed at that, where Black bodies are concerned, usually Black bodies will respond. So absolutely there is a conversation that's going on.
In Morocco, there was an important petition that was signed by many artists, and then to free journalists that were imprisoned, and artists were very much implicated, and many of them were intimidated. Then there was a counter petition by the government many people had to withdraw their names. I mean, there was such a moment of terror, and even, how many years is it, 2019? 20. You can read it online. I think the title is something with the word shadows. I'll find it afterwards and I'll tell you for those who are interested. But it was a very important moment, and I don't think it's not linked. It is linked to all these arts and activism and emancipation movements. You did.
I think you had at least another question, but I don't know.
Hello, thank you so much. My name is Hall Rockefeller. I run an organization called Less Than Half that is dedicated to recovering the work of women artists. At least two members of this.
Recovering the work of?
Recovering?
Recovering the work of women artists.
Women artists.
Women artists.
Women artists. I think at least two of the panelists here have built into their organizations some sort of feminist practice. I think Ayana being interested in supporting caregivers, whether or not they're women, is a feminist issue, and then Ito, your interest in eco-feminist philosophies. Is that something that is common across new initiatives that are cropping up across Africa, or do we have a particular sample here that is skewed toward that interest?
That's a great question. Many of the artists and the artist-led organizations that I'm interested in, that I follow, that inspire me, are led by women. And many women artists, you know, like Le 18 in Marrakech, Leila Hida, now Francesca's in charge, but there are so many fantastic artists locally, and with whom we share the same, I think, issues of the questions of, you know, fees and the evaluation of the art being lower, that for male artists, visibility, don't even talk about it. It's a whole thing. I've also worked and supported recently, even here, a 94-year-old artist that just passed called Bettina Grossman, who still lived at the Chelsea Hotel. And with Gregor Hubert, we just did a book that will be published by Aperture in June. And Bettina is part of a huge generation of women who are working in this incredible city of New York and who were totally ignored. And I think from that generation you have, I mean, look at the lists in any book. I'm saying something that's quite obvious. But in Morocco, the young generation and the elder generation are starting to work together into making things happen a little bit faster and with a strong awareness, I'd say.
Yes, I can't say that I'm aware of very many. Someone just told me of another initiative on the continent, but I cannot. It pains me not to remember who or where it is. But yes, there are a sprinkling of yeah. I guess if you're going to consider I'll just say care like. Residencies that are focused on mothers and primary caregivers. There are very few. I know of one other that's being developed alongside mine. But yeah, I think one of the things that's important is as a woman artist, as women, many, especially once we become mothers, and I am not yet a mother, but there's this period that kind of one can kind of find themselves out of the situation very quickly just by disappearing for a reasonable amount of time to kind of nurse your family, right? And so there has not been a lot of work. There's been work to bring women into the fold, but I think that this thing of bringing mothers back into the fold and helping them to come back into their studio practice is a need, not just in Africa. Because I mean, there are definitely issues around that, and so I think more and more this is being recognized because galleries themselves are beginning to. Speaking with a gallerist in Zimbabwe, and she's literally begging her not begging one of her artists to get back to work, but is begging her to have she's ready to get back, but she's feeling shy because she's been out for a long time. So it's this thing of like the not having the tools and the infrastructure to kind of slowly, at your own pace. In my case, I allow the child to come or into the space. I create space. I help with daycare, you know, and the like, because it's a very specific set of challenges for young mothers, not just young, but for mothers to kind of find a way back into their studio practice. I know this from artists that I have that I'm in cohort with. And so that was just a particular challenge. But I think that's becoming there's more awareness towards this in general. But I know if I can remember it, you can ask me later, there's one other artist that's working with that on the continent.
So, Lori.
Thank you so much. That was so wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Touria. Thank you, Ayana. Thank you, Daudi. Thank you, Othman. Thank you, Ido. Thank you so much.